Good afternoon. This is the Little Painted Desert in Navajo County, and I'm going to break here to talk a little anime.
Senka.
Senka is a short contemporary fantasy story, a one-shot anime originally made for the web. Tetsu is a high school boy with a rough personality and an unusual pet. Senko is a plastic, white blob-like creature that can alter shape and size to disguise itself as ordinary objects. Apparently, the sulky Senko can digest just about anything, and Tetsu has some kind of telepathic connection to it. Senko isn't the only creature of its ilk in this world. When a hole in space opens and drops an even larger version of the critter on top of a skyscraper, people seem to have dealt with this sort of problem before. The army closes off a few blocks of the city, and beyond that, life goes on. Apparently, creatures like Senko are cannibals, eating each other for food. So, despite the size difference, Tetsu is making plans for Senko to take down the big newcomer. Yuki chances to discover Senko when she spots a bicycle that moves by itself. Bikes don't normally have an eyeball. When Yuki pokes it, it reveals Senko's true form, much to Tetsu's annoyance. Yuki thinks Senko is cool, though, even if Tetsu is an obnoxious jerk. Tetsu demands Yuki keep the secret of Senko. But then another boy, Shu, shows up, and he has yet another of the aliens as a pet. And the two boys have their creatures fight it out, while Yuki is caught in the middle. It's hard not to think of Pokemon, with fewer rules, as each of the schoolboys sends his oversized pocket monster against the other. Except, it's a bit more violent to the humans, and eventually the military will lob some artillery into the fray too. It soon becomes clear that Yuki is the only one of these three human characters who actually cares about Senko, and conversely, she's the only character in the story we really care about.
Oi, hanaseyo. Senko.
Senka is short, and in some ways the story seems incomplete. More like a first episode of something than a self-contained program. Obvious questions such as what are these creatures and where do they come from? What do they want? And how did Tetsu get his relationship with Senko in the first place? And other questions like that aren't raised anywhere except on the cover of the DVD box. Senka was created almost entirely by Atsuya Uki, who created it as a manga and then adapted it to a short anime for the web, and then, with Aniplex as a sponsor, expanded it to a 30-minute OVA. Pretty much a one-man show, except for voices and music. Visually, Senka looks excellent. The art looks modern, and it reminded me a bit of The Girl Who Leapt Through Time in places. There were a couple of spots where I thought the framing choice was odd. My eyes would often want to see something that was below the screen, especially with Tetsu and Senko together, where Senko is often half or more off-screen.
For example, at the top of this shot, the creature on the building has its head off-screen, and at the bottom we see only the turrets of tanks moving in. An odd composition. The only points of interest are at the extreme edges and are half missing.
Some of the visual ideas, such as Senko morphing into a giant stapler or a pair of scissors for his fights, are clever enough. And it's interesting that Senko can pull Tetsu and Yuki inside for protection or transport, though that flexible white interior makes for a pretty dull background. There isn't much music in Senka until we hit the closing credit roll. It's heavier into sound effects and a few sound effect-like notes than traditional musical soundtrack. For all its technical proficiency, I never made an emotional connection to the characters or the story. It all seemed rather dry to me. The pacing is okay, and the story is skillfully organized. I liked the way it cut some scenes early, skipping some of the usual perfunctory stuff, and let it just fill it in when we saw where the next scene took us. But Senka lacks a real high point or climax. Among Tetsu, Senko, Yuki, and Shu, Yuki is the only one with a likable personality. So, I give Senka 3.5 stars. As amazing as it is that it's a solo creation, I just couldn't find it especially entertaining. Atsuya Uki seems an imaginative designer and a talented artist, but Senka lacks a certain ineffable spark from a storyteller. Senka isn't available in a US release, at least not now. I picked up the Japanese DVD release. That DVD has no extras whatsoever. I thought sure they'd at least put a chat with creator Atsuyuki on it.
Thanks for listening.